The numbers on my data slate did not reconcile. Mass screamed rogue planet, a dense ball of rock and ice big enough to pull at the fabric of space-time from half a light-year out. Density whispered that it was hollow, or at least porous on a scale that defied geology. My thumb slicked with sweat on the slate's casing, smearing the Omniglade logo, the simple hexagon and circle that owned every piece of equipment on this ship, myself included. "Report, Dr. Keats." Captain Roland Wolf's voice had a quality of perfect stillness, like a sound recorded in a vacuum. He stood at the front of the observation deck, a silhouette against the endless black, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of permanent parade rest. He hadn't turned, but I felt his attention shift toward me. I cleared my throat. "The gravity readings are stable, Captain, but the spectral analysis, it's a mess. High concentrations of carbon, nitrogen, complex proteins, and a thermal gradient that makes no sense. It's cold, deep space cold on the surface, but there are isolated hotspots deep inside, warm spots." A voice cut through the comms built into the deck's speakers, a rough-edged sound that grated against Wolf's controlled quiet. "Warm spots, in a place that's got no sun. Sounds like a bad place to be, Keats." I didn't need the omni-cortex, our integrated comms and biometric network, to tell me that was Nash. His cynicism was as much a part of the OGS Ventures engineering section as the drive coils. Wolf ignored him. "Your conclusion, Doctor." I took a breath. This was it. The moment my career pivoted, or snapped. For 10 years, I'd been a bioprospector for Omniglade, the company that had taught us the universe was just a ledger of unclaimed assets. My job was to fly out to a designated substrate, a planet, a moon, an asteroid field, and catalogue its biological potential for monetization. It was a good living that chipped away at the soul. But this thing, this anomaly, this wasn't on the company's list. This was mine. "It's not a planet," I said. "It's biological. The scale is, I don't have a category for it, but all the data points to a single colossal organism." I paused, letting the statement hang in the flat, even light of the bridge. "And based on the lack of any active energy output, I'd say it's been dead for a very long time." Wolf finally turned. His face was all sharp angles and discipline, a man who believed the procedural manual was the closest thing to scripture. "A dead organism the size of a small moon. Your recommendation? A 4.3 light-year detour from our assigned survey route, full sensor sweep and a surface sample expedition. Captain, this isn't just an asset. This is a keystone find. An entirely new classification of life. A discovery of this magnitude. The name Keats would be on every stock ticker from here to Sol." I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He wasn't thinking about discovery. He was calculating risk, fuel expenditure, time lost, the 1,001 regulations I was asking him to bend. His eyes drifted from my face to the compliance report on his own slate. He drew a slow breath, the kind that precedes a negative. "The potential valuation outweighs the risk," I pushed, stepping closer. "A creature this size, even its corpse, could contain biological compounds, structural data. We could be talking about a generational find. A man could build his entire legacy on being the one who didn't fly past it." I was speaking to his ambition now, the small buried part of him that must also fear dying as just another company man with a perfect service record and nothing else. Wolf's eyes met mine. They were grey, the colour of a storm-heavy sea. "Log the course change, Mr. Park," he said, his voice now aimed at the analysis station tucked in the corner. A figure swiveled in his chair. Malcolm Park, the mission's risk and asset analyst, was a man who looked like he'd been assembled in a clean room. His environment suit was immaculate. Even his posture was a straight line. He was the system personified, the living embodiment of the spreadsheets that governed our lives. "Captain," Park said, his voice smooth and frictionless, "I must note for the compliance log that this deviation falls outside mission parameters. The potential asset is, as of now, entirely theoretical. Your notation is logged, Wolf replied. Execute the course correction. The void devoured time, leaving only a feedback loop of analysis and doubt. I lived at my station, fueled by reconstituted slurry and the steady drip of new data, as the anomaly resolved itself from a gravitational ghost into a tangible object. I catalogued tidal stresses, mapped thermal variances, and ran simulations on potential protein structures until the numbers swam behind my eyelids when I closed them. The entity grew in my mind, a new continent of knowledge waiting to be claimed. On the final day, I abandoned the data and went to the observation deck. It was no longer a theory on a screen. It was there, hanging in the black. It filled the main viewport, a colossal crescent of diseased color against the stars. It wasn't a sphere. It was irregular, oblong, like a gargantuan cell that had died in the middle of dividing. The surface was a terrain of waxy, ochre-colored plains veined with deep purple canyons that had to be the collapsed remnants of a circulatory system miles wide. Patches of angry, crimson-red tissue, like inflamed growths the size of mountain ranges, marred its skin. There was no atmospheric haze, no softness. Every detail was rendered in the harsh, clarifying light of a distant star, shadows cutting across the dead flesh like surgical incisions. The sheer biological audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. My entire career had been spent cataloguing microbial mats and hardy xenoflora. This was like discovering a god's corpse. Parker's finalized the landing coordinates. Wolf's voice came from behind me. A plateau in Sector Gamma 7. It appears stable. Stability is a relative term, Captain, Nash grumbled from the engineering console. The whole thing is giving off low-level bioelectric fields. It's playing hell with my fine diagnostics. Noted, Wolf said, his eyes fixed on the thing outside. Dr. Keats, Brandt, suit up. We leave in 30 minutes. The Series 7 field suit was a prison. I sealed my helmet and the world muted, replaced by the intimate sounds of my own body. The rhythmic puff of the respirator. The rustle of the suit's inner lining against my skin. The quiet, tyrannical stream of data scrolling at the edge of my vision on the heads-up display. O2 saturation, 99%. Ambient pressure, near zero. Suit integrity, 100%. The lander, the Scout, was a utility vehicle, not a ship of exploration. Its interior was cramped, smelling of metallic solvents and the bitter tang of the air scrubbers. Strapped into my crash couch across from a young geophysicist named Brandt, I watched the venture shrink in the forward viewport until it was just another star. We didn't so much enter an atmosphere as descend through a fine dust of biological rubble, a constant static against the hull. The landing was jarring, the mag clamps locking onto the surface with a deep clang that vibrated through the floor plates. Wolf's voice filtered through the omnicortex in my helmet. Keats, you have the con. I want a preliminary surface assessment and a core sample from the first viable location. Understood, Captain. The ramp lowered. The light that hit it was stark, casting a perfect black rectangle of shadow onto the ground below. I stepped out, my boots connecting with the surface harder than I expected, the magnetic clamps engaging with a solid clack. My heads-up display, the data stream projected onto the inside of my visor, flickered and updated. Local gravity, 0.87 standard Gs, enough to feel the full weight of the Series 7 suit. The ground was a landscape of enormous interwoven protein fibers, a surface that absorbed the impact of my boots like a sheet of industrial cork. No dust, no gravel, no soil, just this uniform, organic substrate, cold to the touch even through my glove. The absolute heat-leaching cold of the void. I need to get into that depression, I said into my comm. I pointed toward a shallow, crater-like basin about 50 meters away, its walls dropping off at a steep angle. The cross-section might show some layering. Brandt set a line. Brandt, the mission's young geophysicist, gave a sharp nod. He unclipped the kinetic anchor from his hip. The tool was standard Omni-Glade issue for traversal, a ballistic anchoring system we used to secure lines to brittle rock or metal wreckage. He aimed the launcher at the far wall of the crater, a sheer face of the same fibrous material. He fired. There was no sound of a gunshot in the airless void, just a muffled thump I felt through the ground. The tungsten dart of the anchor sank into the pale flesh of the wall up to its hilt. A small green light on Brandt's launcher blinked, signaling that the internal propellant charge had detonated, driving the anchor's grapples outward. "Line set," Brandt confirmed, his voice clear through the omni-cortex. He gave the braided metallic line a hard, sharp tug. It held firm. He clipped his harness to the line and leaned back, his full weight settling onto it. His boots scraped for purchase against the fibrous wall as he began a controlled descent over the crater's steep lip. I watched him go down, my attention already drifting to my own primary tool, the rifle-sized, penetrating chrono sampler. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the best angle for the first core sample. A sudden, sharp intake of breath came over the comms. It was Brandt. "Line slipping," he said, his voice straining. The line, which had been stretched taut under his weight, now had a distinct sag in it. He wasn't rappelling anymore. He was sliding, his boots churning uselessly against the wall. And across the crater, the kinetic anchor wasn't ripping out. It was being slowly, placidly extruded. The resilient flesh was simply pushing the foreign object out, as if squeezing a splinter from its skin. The line went completely slack. Brandt didn't scream. There was no time. He just dropped. A silent, horribly swift plummet in the thin gravity. His body, a heavy bundle of white suit and black equipment, tumbled once. A small cloud of something, not dust but fine, disturbed organic particles, puffed up around him and then settled instantly in the absence of wind. A burst of raw static exploded in my ears, the suit's attempt to process a catastrophic data feed. "Brandt!" Wolf's voice was a blade of ice cutting through the static. "Report!" The only answer was the thin, high-pitched squeal of an open comms channel. I scrambled down the incline, the suit's gyros whining as they fought to keep me upright on the shifting, unpredictable surface. It wasn't like running on soil or rock. It was like trying to move across the skin of a drum, each footfall producing a dull, absorbent thud that seemed to vanish into the mass below. I reached the bottom of the crater and knelt beside him. Brandt's visor was a web of fine fractures, a starburst pattern originating from a single point of impact with a harder outcropping of the fibrous flesh. Through the cracks, I could see nothing but the reflection of my own helmet, distorted and broken. His heads-up display was dark. On my own, the section of the screen dedicated to his vitals was a crimson block of text. Bio-signature, null. Respiration, null. Suit integrity, 17%. The suit's internal logs had already made the assessment for me. Catastrophic failure. "Dr. Keats, status report." Wolf's voice was stripped of all inflection. I took a measured breath, forcing the sound of it to be steady in my own ears. "The geophysicist is non-responsive, Captain. His suit has suffered a total loss of integrity." I was speaking the language of Omni-Glade, the dialect of detached disaster assessment. We didn't have deaths. We had catastrophic personnel failures. "Acknowledged," Wolf said. The single word carried the weight of a dozen unsaid procedures. Then a new voice cut in, cleaner and sharper than Wolf's, a sound untouched by the moment's gravity. It was Malcolm Park, from the safety of the Landers Analysis Station. "Dr. Keats, please confirm the status of the suit's primary data recorder. Its recovery is mission critical." My eyes shifted from Brandt's shattered helmet to the intact Omni-Glade logo on his suit's shoulder plate, a circle inside a hexagon. The same symbol stamped on the data recorder that Park was asking about. He wasn't asking about the man. He was conducting an inventory of the shell he came in. "The data recorder appears intact, Mr. Park." Good. Bag the asset and return to the Scout. The timeline needs to be revised. Asset. He had called Brandt an asset. I looked down at the body, at the limp gloves and the broken helmet. This was the direct result of my ambition, my prospectus. I had sold Wolf on a keystone find, and the down payment was Brandt. Everett. It was Nash, his voice a low grumble in my ear, cutting through the official traffic. The anchor didn't break, it didn't slip. The tissue rejected it. You see that, right? I saw it. My scientific mind, the part of me that catalogued and classified, was already processing the data. The kinetic anchor was a tool built for a universe of dead, predictable physics. It had failed because this place wasn't dead, not in the way a rock is dead. It was post-mortem, it was reactive. I see it, Nash, I managed. Right, he said. Just making sure someone does. Wolf's voice returned, overriding the chatter. Keats, you have your orders. We can't retrieve him from here. We'll need to find a more stable approach. You will find that approach. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order to continue the mission, to walk past the first casualty and keep prospecting. I stood up, the servo motors in the suit's joints whining softly, and turned my back on Brandt. My eyes scanned the crater rim for a new way forward. The landscape looked different now. The alien beauty was gone, replaced by a sense of profound biological indifference. We were a contaminant, and the body was beginning its immune response. Report your vector, Doctor, Wolf's voice commanded in my ear, pulling me back to procedure. Moving parallel to the crater's western ridge, I said, scanning the alien horizon. The curve of this corpse was so immense that the horizon felt unnervingly close. The substrate is the problem. It's reactive. I'm looking for a geological transition. Something inert. A new voice, smooth as polished glass, layered over Wolf's. The mission clock is a resource, Dr. Keats, Malcolm Park said. Every minute you spend walking adds to the debit column. I trust your search will yield a viable access point to justify this expenditure. A bead of sweat broke free and traced a path down my temple inside my helmet. My hand tightened on the stock of the penetrating chronosampler, the rifle-sized tool that was supposed to be my key to understanding this place. Right now it just felt like dead weight, a return on investment. The phrase soured in my mind. Brandt's life was already an entry on the wrong side of that ledger. For a long time the landscape was a monotonous panorama of biological plains, all waxy ochres and purple veins under the black sky. It was a place without weather, without wind, without any sound but the ones I brought with me. The soft huff of my respirator, the electronic whine of the suit, and the incessant, quiet voices on the comms. Miles away, a jagged line cut against the starfield. It wasn't the matte texture of the flesh. It was a gleam, a hard-edged reflection. The sunlight was catching on a range of formations that looked completely out of place, like teeth jutting from a wound. Captain, I said, stopping. I have a visual on a potential site, a series of crystalline formations bearing 315 from my position. They appear to be silicate-based. That means solid ground. There was a pause. I could imagine Wolf on the Venture's observation deck, miles above me, cross-referencing my position with the topographic scans. We see them, Doctor. His voice came through clear and remote. They weren't on the initial low-resolution survey. Proceed with caution. Caution is the new baseline. Nash's voice rumbled, uninvited. The trek took nearly an hour. With every step, the formations grew, resolving themselves from a distant sparkle into a mountain range. They were breathtaking. They rose from the fleshy plains in sheer, fractured cliffs of what looked like raw, unpolished crystal. From a distance, they looked like mountains carved from flawed ruby and dark amber, shot through with veins of black obsidian. The light didn't just reflect off them, it seemed to pass through, setting their depths aglow with an internal fire. This was it. This was a geologist's dream, A completely new mineralogy. My own internal system, the one that calculates value and discovery, began to spin up again, overriding the dread. The guilt over Brandt was still there, but this was a find, a major one. I reached the mouth of a wide canyon formed by two of the colossal ruby-colored cliffs. The scale of them was staggering. They towered over me, their sheer faces blocking out the sky. The fibrous ground at my feet gave way to a hard, glassy surface, a floor of fused black material, solid, stable. I stepped into the canyon. The light changed instantly, the harsh, direct starlight replaced by a diffused crimson gloom filtering through the crystalline walls. The absolute quiet of the plains was gone, replaced by a silence that felt deeper, more profound, as if the thick walls were absorbing every possible vibration. The canyon was a cathedral of alien geology. I envisioned the core samples, the spectral analysis, the report I would write. This would justify everything. I took another 20 steps inside on the black floor. My work light, a bright white beam, cut through the red dimness. It swept across the canyon wall to my right, illuminating the translucent material. And I saw a shape suspended deep inside the amber-like cliff face. It wasn't a pattern in the rock. It was dark, angular, and complex. It was a skeletal mesh of twisted supports, a shattered bulkhead, the unmistakable mangled engine housing of a ship. It was frozen there, meters thick inside the crystal, held in perfect, silent preservation. My light moved, shakily now, tracing the length of the thing. It was immense and utterly alien in its design, a spiral of broken fins and crystalline hull plates. And it wasn't alone. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw another one deeper in, and another. A fleet, an entire graveyard of wrecked, unearthly vessels, all entombed within the beautiful, terrible walls of this canyon. A sharp, involuntary inhale stabbed through me. This wasn't a geological formation. It was a sarcophagus. I took an involuntary step back, my boot slipping on the glassy floor. The clatter of my own movement was a sacrilege in the dead silence of the canyon. I wasn't looking at a mineral deposit. I was looking at a final audit, the unredacted expense report for 1,000 failed ventures. My thumb fumbled on the comm switch. "Wolf," I managed, my own voice a stranger's croak in my helmet. "The formations, they're not geological." A burst of static, then Wolf's voice, distant and tinny. "Explain, Doctor. How do you explain a memorial to extinct gods? How do you describe a museum of dead armadas?" "They're artificial," I said, the words inadequate. "The canyon walls are filled with them. Ships, dozens of them, non-terrestrial. They're encased, preserved." A new voice immediately cut in, crisp and analytical. "Malcolm Park. Dr. Keats, your O-cortex is registering elevated respiration and heart rate. Is your assessment compromised by the loss of the geophysicist?" The accusation was so cold, so perfectly placed, it almost knocked the wind out of me. He wasn't questioning my discovery. He was questioning my emotional stability. "Negative, Mr. Park," I bit out, forcing the words through my teeth. "My assessment is based on direct visual evidence. I'm looking at the wreckage of an entire alien fleet suspended in a translucent material I can't identify." I swung my light to another dark shape, this one organic, a colossal serpent-like creature, its body coiled in a posture of silent agony, its alien flesh held in suspension. Its surface was layered in uneven plates that looked less like armor and more like hardened infection, crusted, cracked, and brittle along the edges. Its head, blunt and eyeless, was twisted back over its spine, jaws parted mid-snarl, as if the moment of death had been a violent one. Then the beam caught something else. Higher in the wall, suspended upside down like a discarded carcass, was a quadrupedal giant. Its limbs were jointed at unnatural angles, terminating in wide, blade-like fans that sagged under their own weight. The torso had been split clean down the center, exposing an interior of ribbed cavities and pulpy chambers. There was no visible musculature, just voids, like the thing had been hollowed out or never finished. Deeper still, almost swallowed by the crystal gloom, was a third form. Broad and flat, its shape resembled a radial star collapsed inward. The arms curled around a hollow core. Within that cavity, suspended in stasis, were dozens of tiny dark spheres, too symmetrical to be natural. Their arrangement had a purpose. I didn't want to guess what it was. There are biologicals too, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Creatures. This isn't a canyon. It's a trophy room. Nash, Wolf's voice cut in, sharp now. Are you reading any of this on long-range sensors? Negative, Captain, Nash's grumble replied. Whatever that stuff is, it's dense as a neutron star. It's bending our sensor waves around it. I can't see inside those hills at all. For all my board knows, Keats is standing in a plain old rock canyon. I swept my light across the walls again, the beam a frantic search for anything that could convey the truth, the sheer, damning totality of it. Captain, you have to understand, I pleaded. This isn't a discovery. This is a warning sign 1,000 meters tall. Whatever this creature was, its final act is to perfectly display everything it ever defeated. We need to leave. Now. There was a long silence on the comms. Then Park's voice returned, smooth and unruffled, imbued with a new, chilling authority. Fascinating, he said. Dr. Keats, your visual confirmation, combined with the material's unique sensor-blocking properties and high-density readings, has just fundamentally altered the parameters of this mission. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. Per Omniglade Mandate 72, subsection C, Park continued, his tone as placid as if he were reading a grocery list. The discovery of non-terrestrial technology of this magnitude constitutes a primary asset claim. I am hereby reclassifying this entire sector. Designation: Anomalous Formation Quarry 1. Our prime directive is now the preservation and preliminary survey of this asset. Captain Wolf, I am advising a full operational lockdown. We are not leaving. The words hit the absolute silence of the canyon and shattered it. My brain refused to process the sentence. It was a data error, a corrupted packet of audio. Park, you're not listening. This isn't an asset, it's an epitaph. It's the final word from every other poor bastard who made the same mistake we did. Your emotional interpretation is noted in the log, Doctor. Park replied, his calm a form of violence. My assessment is based on the quantifiable reality. We have located a repository of advanced, unclaimed xenotechnology. Omniglade's claim is now staked. The value of this find is, to use your own term, a legacy. He was throwing my own ambition back in my face. I bypassed him, appealing directly to the top of the chain. Captain Wolf, you see this, don't you? You see what this place is. Order the recall. Get me back to the lander and get us out of this system. The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of a man caught between a rulebook and reality. I held my breath, waiting for the command that would save us. When Wolf spoke, his voice was heavy, as if it had to be dragged up from a great depth. Mr. Park's invocation of Mandate 72 is correct. The mission parameters have changed. His authority on matters of asset valuation is primary. He paused. I am logging an official objection citing undue risk. Objection noted, Captain. Park's voice cut in smoothly, dismissing the gesture. Dr. Keats, your new directive stands. Begin a passive spectral analysis of the encasing material. I want a preliminary report on its composition and density within the hour. The order was so absurd, so suicidally mundane that I almost laughed. Scan the tombstone while the gravedigger waits. A new sound chimed in my ear. A notification alert. It wasn't from the comms, it was from my suit's own environmental sensors. On my HUD, a small amber icon began to flash. Warning, rapid shift in localized chemical composition. My eyes snapped down from the entombed ships to the glassy black floor of the canyon. It was no longer a perfect mirror of the crimson gloom. An oily sheen was spreading across its surface like gasoline on water. It wasn't rising from a single point. It was seeping up from hairline fractures all over the canyon floor. It moved without a ripple, a silent, steady tide of iridescent fluid, its colors shifting from deep violet to a chemical green. My brain, overriding the paralysis, instantly cross-referenced the chemical signature flashing on my HUD with my own knowledge base. A hyper-efficient enzymatic catalyst, a digestive agent. It wasn't a tide. It was the canyon clearing its throat. I was standing at the lowest point of a basin that was beginning to fill with a substance designed to unmake things. I looked back the way I came, toward the canyon mouth that seemed impossibly far away. The only way was up. The only way was out. My body finally obeyed the scream it had been holding back. I turned and ran. Running in the Series 7 suit was a controlled fall, a clumsy, pounding gait. The glassy floor was becoming slick with the thin, spreading film of enzyme, and my magnetic boots struggled for purchase, slipping with a high-pitched scrape. "Keats, what is the nature of the event?" Wolf's voice was sharp, demanding order from the chaos of my gasping. "It's a solvent," I said, my eyes fixed on the canyon mouth, a distant rectangle of black against the red gloom. It wasn't getting any closer. "A biological solvent. The entire floor is exuding it." "Your language is imprecise, Doctor," Park cut in, his voice an infuriating island of calm. "Quantify the rate of advance. Is the substance liquid or gaseous?" "It's eating the ground I'm standing on, you son of a bitch." The words tore out of me, raw and unprofessional, a permanent stain on my service record. I didn't care. A rock I dislodged skittered ahead of me and touched the edge of the advancing iridescence. It didn't splash. It just stopped. A wisp of vapor coiled up from its surface as it softened, its edges blurring and darkening like sugar in acid. The mental calculation was brutal and instant. The tide was faster than me. It would cut me off long before I reached the plains. My head whipped left, then right. The canyon walls were sheer, smooth plains of the ruby-colored crystal, offering no purchase. The memory of Brandt's anchor sliding free, of his silent fall, was a flash of white-hot data in my brain. Climbing them was suicide. The fluid was inches from my heels. A frantic, dull thumping started behind my ribs, out of sync with my breathing. Where do I go? Not forward, not sideways. Up. I had to find high ground. My eyes fell on one of the entombed creatures, the colossal, serpent-like thing I had seen earlier. It was low in the wall, its petrified, plated back emerging from the crystal at a 45-degree angle, creating a jagged ramp. Its surface was a mess of hardened, overlapping plates, cracked and pitted. Not smooth crystal, but textured, complex terrain. It was my only chance. I veered hard, my boots skidding. I hit the base of the creature's tail with my shoulder, the impact shuddering through my bones. The material felt like old stone. My gloved hands scrambled for purchase, the thick fabric catching on the sharp, crusted edges of the plates. I hauled myself up, my legs scrabbling against the vertical surface. My right boot found a crevice. I pushed, my thighs screaming with the effort of lifting my own weight plus the suit. Below me, the tide of shimmering fluids silently met the base of the crystal wall. The glassy black floor vanished, replaced by a placid, swirling pool of chemical unmaking. I was climbing out of a rising executioner's bath. Another heave. My fingers found another ridge. I pulled, my armor scraping against the alien fossil. I was maybe 20 feet up when I risked a glance down. The canyon was gone. In its place was a river of roiling colors, an inland sea of dissolution steadily rising up the walls. The entrance I had run from was submerged. The path back to the lander was gone. I was marooned on a dead leviathan's spine in a canyon filling with acid, with no way down and no clear way up. "Everett." It was Nash's voice, a low rumble that cut through my panic. "Status." I sagged against the rough plates, the sound of my own harsh breathing the only answer I could give. I clung to the side of the tomb, a parasite on a monument, and watched my escape route dissolve. "Status!" I gasped out. "Position is untenable. The canyon floor it's undergoing a hostile takeover. Total dissolution. I'm stranded on an inclusion in the wall. The path to the lander is gone." "How far up are you?" 20, maybe 30 feet. "And the fluid?" Wolf asked. "Is it still rising?" I risked leaning out. The iridescent surface crept higher up the canyon wall, a silent, colourful death. It had already swallowed the first 10 feet of the fossil I was clinging to. "Affirmative, Captain. Rate of ascent is slow but steady. I estimate I have less than 2 hours before my current position is submerged." A crisp, new voice joined the exchange. "Dr. Keats," Park said, "this presents a unique opportunity. You have direct access to one of the primary biological inclusions. While you await a retrieval solution, you will proceed with your directive. I need a close-range spectral analysis of the specimen's tissue." The order was so fundamentally disconnected from my reality that it felt like a transmission from another universe. My fingers, curled around a petrified ridge, ached with cold. My body was a taut wire of exhaustion and adrenaline, and he wanted me to take notes. "Park," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Do you see the biometric feed on my omnicortex, the section labelled Life Signs?" "I see a specialist whose emotional state is compromising his ability to perform his duties," Park retorted smoothly. "The mission requires data. Provide it." I didn't answer him. I took my right hand off its hold, the shift in balance sending a tremor through my legs. My fingers, clumsy in the thick glove, unclipped the chronosampler from my thigh rig. It felt heavy enough to pull me off the wall. I let it dangle from its strap. Then, with my free hand, I found another hold higher up. I started climbing again, one hold at a time. The crusted plates of the creature were sharp, biting into the polymer of my gloves. Each movement was a calculated risk, a battle against gravity and the dead weight of the suit. Below, the quiet fluid churned. My only focus was the rough alien surface inches from my face. I finally dragged myself onto a wider ledge, the creature's shoulder blade, perhaps. It was a broad, flat expanse, maybe 10 feet across, canted at a sharp angle. It wasn't safe, but it was a reprieve. I collapsed onto my stomach, the metal of my chest plate scraping against the fossil. I could see the full horror of the canyon. The entire valley floor was now a placid lake of shimmering poison. It reflected the crimson light from the walls, making it look like a river of blood. At the far end, where the canyon opened onto the plains, I could still see my own footprints in the leathery ground, right at the fluid's edge. I watched as the very last one, the one closest to the tide, softened, blurred, and was gently erased from existence. My eyes drifted to my HUD, the suit's main power indicator, a reassuring bar of solid green, had been slowly shrinking. The extra work of the thermal regulators and the strain of the climb had taken their toll. 91%. I was on a shrinking island in a rising sea and my world was running out of power. I was a non-recoverable biological loss, a bad investment about to be written off the books. And the only thing worse than the slow, quiet tide below was the knowledge that Malcolm Park was somewhere safe, watching my vital signs deplete like numbers on a balance sheet, and patiently waiting for his report. The comms were silent. Wolf was likely locked in a procedural battle with Park. Park himself was probably enjoying the quiet, assuming my insubordination had given way to terrified compliance. Only Nash's voice had broken the silence a few minutes ago. "Everett," he'd said, his tone low and conspiratorial, like he was shielding his comms with a hand. "Can you see the lander from where you are?" I had craned my neck, looking past the lip of the canyon. From my perch, I could just make out the top of the scout's white hull, a tiny shape on the vast ochre plain. It looked 1,000,000 miles away. "Affirmative," I'd replied. "Right," he'd said, and that was all. He hadn't offered a plan or a promise, just a confirmation of facts. He was a mechanic. He was assessing the state of the broken machine. Part of that machine was me. Now there was only the cold and the silence. My ambition, the fire that had driven me to this place, felt like a distant memory from another man's life. The prospect of fame, of the name Keats being etched into history, seemed like a child's fantasy. The only thing I wanted was to feel the solid deck of the venture under my feet again. My eyes fell to the penetrating chronosampler still clipped to my thigh. Park's order echoed in my mind. Provide the data. A hot, useless anger flared in my chest. To hell with his report, to hell with his data. But the tool was there, and I was a scientist. Doing nothing was a harder death than trying. I unclipped the PCS. I wasn't going to drill anything. But the sampler had a secondary function, a narrow-band resonance scanner designed to map the structural integrity of a potential sample site. It could see into things. I braced the device against my shoulder, aiming across the canyon. The opposite wall was a sheer, unbroken cliff of the same ruby-colored crystal, towering hundreds of feet above the rising tide. I activated the scanner. A wireframe schematic appeared on my HUD, overlaying my view of the wall. Green lines flashed, mapping a uniform density. Perfect, homogeneous crystal, exactly as I expected. I swept the scanner slowly to the right, painting the wall with invisible waves. More of the same. A perfect, inescapable prison. It was a pointless exercise, a final act of professional curiosity before the end. Then something flickered. I swung the scanner back. There. A patch of the wireframe, no bigger than my fist on the display, was glowing a dull, insistent yellow. An anomaly, a structural inconsistency. I zoomed in, the display resolving into a tighter view. The crystal in that one spot wasn't uniform. It was fractured internally, a web of hairline cracks emanating from a central point. And the scanner was picking up something else, an energy signature, a chaotic, unstable trickle of leaking power. Something inside that part of the tomb wasn't as dead as the rest. Something had fought back. Something had almost broken the seal. A new set of numbers scrolled across my screen, a chemical analysis of the particles leaking from the fissures. They were unfamiliar, a complex alloy signature I'd never encountered. But it wasn't the alloy that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the estimated age of the decay signature. The other wrecks were ancient, millions of years old. This one? The reading was unstable, but the oldest number it settled on was 50,000 years. In geological and evolutionary terms, it was yesterday. It was an imperfection, a flaw in the system, a chink in the armor of God's corpse. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't hope. It was just a single, quantifiable data point that wasn't supposed to exist. And in a world of absolute deadly certainty, it was everything. I keyed the comms. "Captain Wolf, Mr. Park, I have new data." "We are listening, Doctor," Park said, a hint of condescension in his tone. I didn't rise to the bait. I spoke his language. "My resonance scan has identified a structural flaw in the opposite canyon wall. Sector Delta 9, a localized point of material instability within anomalous formation Quarry 1. I fed the data stream from my sampler directly into the main comms link. On their screens, they would see what I saw. The yellow fracture, the leaking energy signature, the radically younger age estimate. The data suggests an incomplete encasement protocol, I continued, choosing my words like threading a needle through a minefield. The subject vessel at this location was composed of an alloy that resisted the antibody agent. It represents a potential vulnerability, a failure in the system. There was a moment of silence. I imagined Park's immaculate brow furrowing as he tried to fit this new information into his rigid worldview. "A failure in the system is still part of the system, Dr. Keats," Park said finally. "This is an even more compelling reason to continue our analysis. This is invaluable data." "It's a way out, Park," I snapped, the professional veneer cracking. "That fracture is our only chance." Everett is right, Nash's voice cut in. A failure point is an entry point, or an exit point. What's the plan, son? All eyes, all attention were on me. The weight was immense. The lander, I said, the plan forming as I spoke. The scout's pilot needs to bring it to the canyon's edge. He'll have to hover, holding position directly across from my location. That's a negative, Doctor, Wolf said immediately from the venture. The bioelectric interference and unpredictable gravimetrics make a sustained hover at that altitude far outside safety parameters. Safety parameters got Brandt killed, Captain, I shot back. They're about to get me killed. We need to get a line to that fracture point. We need to see what's inside. The scout has seismic charges for geological surveying, doesn't it? We have a complement of 4 Type C mining charges aboard, Nash confirmed. Low yield, directional. That's what we use, I said, my voice gaining momentum. We attach a charge to a tether. The scout flies over, lowers it down to the fracture point. We detonate it. A low-yield blast might be enough to widen the cracks to expose whatever is inside. The madness of it was staggering. We were going to throw a bomb at a god's tombstone from a hovering vehicle, all while floating above a river of acid. Park's voice was like a blade of ice. Captain Wolf, I am formally advising against this course of action. It is reckless, unsanctioned, and risks the mission's primary asset, the lander itself, for a statistically insignificant chance of retrieving a single compromised specialist. I will not authorize the use of ordnance. This was the moment, the fulcrum. Wolf had to choose. A long, agonizing silence stretched. Nash, Captain Wolf said, and his voice was different. The hesitation was gone. Ready a Type C charge. Pilot, bring the scout to the canyon's edge. You will follow Dr. Keats's instructions to the letter. A wave of something, not relief, it was too sharp for that, shot through me. He'd done it. He'd broken the rules. Before I could even acknowledge the order, a new alert chimed in my helmet, a sound I had never heard before. It was a system-wide override command. On my HUD, the friendly green and amber icons flashed orange, then a deep warning red. The faces of my crewmates vanished, replaced by a single icon, the Omni-Glade hexagon. Warden's voice, the calm, synthesized intelligence of the lander's core AI, filled my ears. Asset preservation mandate engaged. All flight and primary systems are now under central control pending risk assessment. Command authority has been suspended. Please stand by. Park had done it. He hadn't just objected. He had pulled the ultimate procedural trigger. He had locked us out of our own ship. I hammered the comm switch with the heel of my hand. Wolf, Nash, do you read me? Your query has been logged. Warden's placid voice replied in my helmet. I tried again, screaming into the dead air. Park, you bastard, call it off. Your query has been logged. Please stand by. The repetition was a form of torture, a perfectly calibrated system designed to break a man by showing him he no longer mattered. I was no longer a person. I was a query, a ticket in a queue that would never be answered. My eyes fell to the rising tide below. The iridescent fluid had climbed another 2 feet, its surface now disturbingly close to my boots. The ledge I was on, the fossilized bone that felt so solid, was just a temporary reprieve. Suit power, 81%. The numbers were a death sentence delivered 1 percentage point at a time. Something hollow cracked open inside me, and the void rushed in. My fatal flaw wasn't ambition. It was faith. Faith that a system designed to acquire assets would ever prioritize the lives of the men it sent to find them. Park wasn't a monster. He was a perfect employee. He was protecting the company's investment from the faulty, emotional piece of equipment that was me. I sagged against the wall, the fight draining out of me. Checkmate. The dead god's immune system below, the corporation's immune system above. Both implacable, both indifferent, both executing their own perfect, inhuman protocols. I closed my eyes, the red logo burning itself onto the inside of my eyelids. A sound ripped through the synthesized silence. A blast of raw, unfiltered static, a sound like tearing metal. My HUD flickered wildly, the red hexagon dissolving into a storm of digital snow. Then a voice. Everett. Nash. He'd torn a hole in the system. On the Sagan's reach. His voice crackled, a ghost from a past disaster speaking into my present one. I warned him. The captain, a good company man. I showed him the stress fractures on the reactor shielding. He showed me the mission schedule. Said the risk was within acceptable parameters. I clung to his voice, to the raw human signal cutting through the corporate prison. I watched him burn, Nash rasped. Watched them all burn, from a lifeboat I'd been maintaining against regulations. For years I've told myself I did all I could. A lie. I filed the report. I let the man with the rulebook make the choice. The static grew louder, shot through with the high-pitched whine of a system about to fail. I'm not watching it happen again, Everett. You hear me? Sometimes the only way to fix a broken machine is to break it a little more. In the right place. His voice cut out. Before I could process his words, my eyes were drawn to the lander, the small white shape on the plane. A brilliant, silent flare of blue-white energy erupted from its underside, a plume of superheated plasma venting into the vacuum. The entire vessel shuddered visibly, even from my distance. The red hexagon on my HUD vanished, replaced by a cascade of system-wide failure alerts. Emergency lighting schematics, hull breach warnings, drive coil overload. Park had locked the doors to protect his asset. So Nash had just set the asset on fire. The static in my ears resolved into voices. Contain the plasma bleed. Seal the engine room. That was Wolf, his voice stripped of its parade ground calm and forged into a tool of immediate crisis management. Too late for that, Captain. Nash's voice crackled, laced with a strange, weary satisfaction. The main conduits are melted slag. She's not flying anywhere. You did this, a voice hissed, thin and shaking with a furious, impotent rage. Malcolm Park. His authority had been burned away, leaving only the sound of a true believer whose temple had just been desecrated. This is mutiny. This is the destruction of a multi-billion credit asset. I will see you— Shut up, Park! Wolf cut in, the command a flat dead thing. There was no anger in it, just the infinite exhaustion of a man who had run out of rules to follow. You're relieved of duty. Nash, report. What do we have left? A pause filled with the sound of crackling energy. The lander is dead, Captain. But the emergency shuttle might be viable. The Stingray. Its systems are independent. The Stingray. A short-range, three-man emergency craft docked at an external hardpoint, designed for atmospheric re-entry and nothing more. It was a lifeboat, and it was parked 500 meters away from the main lander, at a secondary survey site we were meant to investigate tomorrow. An eternity away. Everett. Wolf's voice was suddenly in my ear. Can you get out of that canyon? I looked across the chasm. The tide of solvent was still rising, a slow, patient clock. My suit power was at 78%. Negative, Captain. The way out is submerged. I can't get back to the plains. There has to be a way across, Nash insisted. What about the things in the walls? The wrecks? My eyes traced the line of the canyon. Halfway down, one of the smaller entombed ships, a narrow, needle-like vessel, jutted out further than the others. If I could climb high enough along this fossil, I might be able to get level with it. But to cross the open space, it was impossible. Movement caught my eye. High up, near the canyon rim, it was drifting down from the plains, tumbling over the edge of the cliff in a slow, silent waterfall. It wasn't a gas. It had weight, substance, the scrubbers, the microscopic agents of fine-scale sterilization, the mist of unmaking. My suit's air quality sensors remained stubbornly green. The agents weren't a respiratory threat, they were a material one. They didn't choke, they simply unmade. The mist touched the top of the canyon wall. The hard, crystalline edge didn't dissolve violently like the rock in the acid. It just lost its cohesion. The sharp line softened, crumbling into a fine, dark powder that slid down the cliff face. It was the quietest, most absolute form of destruction I had ever witnessed. The mist was now pouring into the canyon, a gentle, lethal fog descending from above. The rising tide was below. I was caught in the middle, the habitable space of my world shrinking by the second. "Captain," I said, my voice eerily calm, "we have a new problem. It's coming down from the plains. A mist. It's breaking down the canyon wall on contact." "Breaking it down how?" Wolf demanded. "Explosively? Corrosively?" "No," I said, watching a razor-sharp crystalline edge slump into a pile of dark powder. "It's simpler than that. It just undoes the bonds. The matter forgets how to hold itself together. It's an entropy field in aerosol form." A long pause on the comms. Nash's voice finally broke it. "Right. So the floor is eating your boots and the ceiling is unzipping your helmet. How much time does that buy you?" I did the calculation, a grim exercise in competing velocities. The tide rising from below, the mist descending from above. The space between them was my entire world, and it was shrinking. 10 minutes, maybe less." "That's not a rescue window," Wolf stated, the fact laid bare. "It's a eulogy." My eyes locked on the needle-like ship across the chasm. The wreck jutted out from the wall, 100 feet of alien metal spanning a portion of the void. It was my only route, my only bridge to the other side. But it was 50 feet away, across an open chasm of empty air. "Nash," I said, my mind latching on to the one possibility that wasn't immediate death. "The kinetic anchors, they failed on the organic substrate." "Yeah, I remember," he grunted. "But the wrecks aren't organic. They're metal, hardened alloys. The anchor should hold in that." "It'll hold," he agreed. "But I can't fire it at you. Too much risk of a misfire hitting your suit." "Don't fire it at me," I said, scrambling higher up the fossilized spine, my gloves scrabbling for purchase. The descending mist was closer now, and I could see the individual shimmering particles within it. "Fire it into the wreckage, the needle ship, the part closest to me." "And how am I supposed to do that from the lander, half a click away?" he shot back. "You're not." Wolf's voice cut in, understanding the desperate logic instantly. "Pilot, get us airborne. Get the Stingray to the canyon's edge." The plan was suicide layered on top of insanity. A tiny 3-man shuttle hovering on thrusters over a dissolving canyon, trying to make a 100-foot shot with a ballistic anchor. But it was the only plan left. I had to get higher, to get level with the alien wreck. The mist was thick enough now that I could feel a strange tingling on the back of my helmet, a faint vibration as the outermost layers of polymer were being gently unmade. My HUD flashed. A new warning icon appeared. Suit exterior integrity, 98%. My right glove scraped against a sharp plate and a flake of the black polymer peeled away like dead skin. The material underneath was tacky to the touch. My second skin was coming apart. I hauled myself onto the last highest point of the fossil, a precarious perch barely wide enough for my boots. Across the void, the needle ship waited. I could see the Stingray now, a tiny, agile insect of a ship dropping toward the canyon rim. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. "I'm in position," I said into the comms. "Take the shot, Nash." "Hold steady, Everett," Nash's voice grunted. I could hear the thrusters of the Stingray fighting the unstable gravimetrics. The shuttle dipped, its belly exposed. From a mounting on its underside, a kinetic anchor launched. It was a silent silver streak against the red gloom. It flew true, crossing the chasm in a heartbeat. The anchor slammed into the metal hull of the needle ship with a sharp, satisfying clang, a vibration carried through the tomb wall. The propellant charge fired, and the grapples bit deep into the alien metal. A thin, braided line now spanned the chasm, connecting my island of crumbling bone to the far shore. The mist was a breath on my neck. My glove integrity was down to 94%. There was no time to test the line, no time for a safety harness. I took a deep breath, wrapped my failing gloves around the thin cable, and leaped into the void. For a single silent moment, there was only the fall. Then the cable snapped taut, a violent bone-jarring shock that ripped a grunt from my chest. My arms, already screaming with exhaustion, took the full swinging weight of my body and the suit. The vibration of the line shuddered up through my hands. I dangled, spinning slowly, 100 feet above the river of solvent. "He's on the line." Wolf's voice was a burst of static. "Hold the stingray steady." The mist swirled around me, a silent, corrosive veil. The tingling on my helmet intensified. My HUD flashed again. Suit exterior integrity, 92%. A piece of my shoulder pauldron, its structure undone, detached and crumbled into a sprinkle of black dust that was instantly lost in the gloom. There was no time for fear. There was only the cable, hand over hand. The movement was clumsy, brutal. My failing gloves offered a poor grip on the thin metal. Pull, scrape. The cable sliced into the gummy, degrading polymer of my palms, leaving tacky black streaks on the silver line. My arms were levers of meat and bone, burning with a white-hot fire. My world narrowed to the few feet of cable in front of my faceplate. Pull, scrape, breathe. The sound of my own respiration was a panicked roar, the suit's life support straining to keep up. The shuttle's thrusters, fighting the gravimetric distortions, sent a new shudder down the line. I swung wildly, my legs kicking at empty air. My left hand, its glove material now stretched and thin, slipped. For a half-second, my entire weight was on my right arm. A sound somewhere between a sob and a scream was torn from my throat. I found the line again with my left hand, my grip a desperate, crushing clench. "Damn it, Everett, move!" Nash yelled, his voice a drill sergeant's bark in my ear. "That mist is taking you apart, piece by piece. Move!" The anger in his voice was a jolt of pure adrenaline. Below me, the solvent had claimed the fossil I'd leaped from. There was no going back. There was only the other side. The dark metal hull of the needle ship grew agonizingly closer. I could see the detail on it now. A surface scarred with micrometeorite impacts, its design seamless, with no visible rivets or plates. 10 feet away. 5. My suit integrity flashed 88%. My arms were numb, disconnected things that moved on pure reflexive command. My gloves were shredded, the raw fabric of the inner lining exposed. With a final heave, I lunged. The toes of my magnetic boots scraped against the hull. For a horrifying second, they didn't engage. Then, with a solid, beautiful clack, they found purchase. I was on. I collapsed against the alien metal, my body a single, trembling muscle. I pressed my faceplate against the hull. I had made it. I was across. But I wasn't safe. The mist was thicker here, pooling around the contours of the alien ship. My suit integrity dropped to 87%. My HUD lit up with a new warning. Left gauntlet seal failure detected. Atmospheric integrity compromised. My blood went still. It wasn't the mist dissolving the suit from the outside anymore. Now the vacuum was pulling the air out from the inside. A new number appeared on my HUD. A pressure gauge for my left arm, the needle dropping steadily into the red. My fingers inside the glove felt strange, a buzzing numbness as the pressure fell. "Everett, what's your status?" Wolf's voice was tight with alarm. "I'm losing pressure in my left arm." I pushed myself away from the hull, my magnetic boots keeping me anchored. "I'm on the wreck, but there's no way in. The hull is seamless." "There has to be an access point," Nash insisted. "A maintenance hatch, an exhaust port, something." I ran my glove along the metal. Smooth, perfect, unbroken. It was like trying to find a door in an eggshell. The mist swirled around me, and the integrity of my chest plate dropped another percentage point. I was dissolving and decompressing at the same time. My mind, stripped bare by the terror, latched onto the only tool I had left, the only thing that had given me an edge in this entire cursed place. I unslung the penetrating chronosampler. My left hand was clumsy, the fingers stiff and unresponsive, but my right was steady. I powered on the resonance scanner again, aiming it at the hull right in front of me. The wireframe schematic flashed on my HUD. It was a chaotic mess of alloys and power conduits, a map of an alien nervous system. But my eye was drawn to the data I'd seen before, the leaking energy signature. From this range, I could pinpoint its source. It wasn't a general leak. It emanated from a single, precise point on the hull, no bigger than my hand. To my naked eye, the spot was identical to the rest of the ship. But the scanner showed it was different. A complex microcircuitry lay just beneath the surface, connected to the ship's dormant power core. It was a lock, and the energy signature it was bleeding out was a pattern, a repeating signal. Nash, the PCS. It has a micropulse emitter. Can I get it to replicate a frequency? Theoretically, he crackled back. But you'd have to input the modulation manually. It's a diagnostic function, not a field tool. Why? The lock is broadcasting a key, I said, jabbing my way through the sampler's control layers like diffusing a bomb. The interface was dense, a series of sub-menus I'd never had cause to open. I ignored the screaming warnings on my HUD. Suit pressure in my left arm was critical. The glove felt like it was shrinking, crushing my numb fingers. The first attempt failed. I sent a pulse that was too strong, and the scanner showed the alien circuitry recoil, temporarily shutting down. Come on, I whispered, my good hand tapping at the controls, adjusting the waveform, dampening the amplitude. The circuitry flared back to life. I had one more chance before it overloaded for good. I matched the resonance, the modulation, the precise oscillating rhythm of the signal. The spot on the hull in front of me began to ripple. The seamless metal flowed like liquid mercury, the molecules losing their cohesion. An iris of perfect geometry opened in the hull, revealing a dark, triangular tunnel leading into the ship's interior. I dove through the opening head first, dragging the PCS with me. As my boots cleared the threshold, the iris spiraled shut behind me with a whisper of displaced air. The internal diagnostics on my HUD stabilized. A single screen of stark, white text against the black. Atmospheric pressure nil. My suit was now the only thing keeping the void contained inside my glove. The skin on my left arm was burning cold, a pins and needles sensation that was rapidly climbing toward my elbow. I slapped the activation stud for my helmet lights. A cone of pure white light cut through the absolute black. It didn't illuminate a room. It bored a tunnel through the darkness. The walls were a dull, matte black that drank the light, making my powerful beam look weak and pathetic. It wasn't a corridor of metal, but some kind of dense, non-reflective ceramic or polymer. The floor under my boots was textured with a pattern of shallow, interlocking hexagons. I stumbled forward, my right hand clamping over the shredded glove on my left, a useless gesture against the inescapable physics of a vacuum. My suit's medical kit had an emergency sealant patch. I had to get to it. The hexagonal pattern on the floor led me down the corridor. There were no doors, no side passages. It was a single, long tube. Then an alcove appeared on the right, a shallow depression in the wall. It was enough. I half fell into it, my back hitting the light-absorbing wall. With my good hand, I fumbled at the latch on my thigh rig. My fingers were clumsy, thick sausages of panic. The latch finally sprang open. I ripped out the emergency patch kit, a small, flat packet, and tore it open. Inside was a wad of translucent, gel-like substance. I peeled the ruined glove away from my left hand. The flesh underneath was mottled white and blue, the capillaries ruptured. The hissing was now a steady, sickening whisper. I slapped the wad of gel over the shredded fabric and the exposed joint seal. It clung like a second skin. I had to hold it there, applying pressure, forcing it into the gashes while its chemical compounds catalyzed and hardened. While I held my suit together with one hand, I used my suit's command interface to run an atmospheric scan. My only hope was that this sealed wreck held a breathable atmosphere. A small icon on my HUD began to flash as the external sensors tasted the dead air of the ship. Nitrogen 71%, argon 22%, oxygen 6%, trace elements unknown, temperature -40 degrees Celsius. My heart sank. 6% oxygen was unsurvivable. But then a new line appeared. Pressure 1.2 standard atmospheres. The ship wasn't a vacuum. It was pressurized with a cold, inert gas mixture. The pressure differential was what was tearing my suit apart. But it also meant I wasn't fighting a perfect void. The gel was hardening, becoming stiff and unyielding. The hissing quieted, then stopped. I watched the pressure gauge for my left arm. It had bottomed out. Now, slowly, it began to climb. "Wolf, Nash," I said into the dead air. Silence. Not static, not the hiss of a carrier wave. Just a perfect, profound absence. The hull wasn't blocking the signal, it was erasing it. The ship was a sealed specimen jar. My connection to the crew, to the stingray, to everything human, was gone. I pushed myself off the wall. The patch on my glove was stiff and brittle, a crude, translucent shell. My fingers inside were clumsy and numb, but they worked. It would have to be enough. There was only one direction to go. Forward. I walked, my boots making a sharp, rhythmic clack on the hexagonal floor. The sound was unnervingly loud, an intrusion in a place that felt like it had been silent for 50,000 years. My helmet beam cut a weak hole in the darkness ahead. The light-absorbing walls seemed to fight back, compressing the beam, making me feel like I was walking down a throat that was constricting around me. The corridor ended abruptly, opening into a larger chamber without a door or threshold. The space was a bulbous, organic chamber, the far wall curving up and over my head. And in the center, mounted on a slender pillar extending from the floor, was a single chair, and in the chair a pilot. It wasn't a skeleton. The cold, inert atmosphere had preserved it with perfect, horrifying fidelity. It was long and thin, its limbs folded into the tight confines of the seat like a desiccated insect. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched over a delicate frame. It had 2 arms, like a man, but each ended in a hand with 7 long, fragile-looking fingers. These fingers weren't on a console. They were fused directly into the material of the chair's armrests, woven into the circuitry like biological wiring. Its head was tilted back, its face aimed at the curved ceiling. It had no visible eyes, only 2 smooth, shallow indentations where they should have been. Its mouth was a simple, lipless slit. I approached slowly, my boots sounding like gunshots in the silent chamber. The pilot was one with its machine, a bio-integrative system. It didn't fly the ship with buttons and levers. It was the ship's central nervous system. I raised the PCS, aiming its sensor suite at the pilot. Data streamed onto my HUD. I filtered out the biological markers, carbon-based, nitrogen-breathing, and focused on the ship's systems. The pilot's body was a conduit. The ship's main power core was dead, completely drained. But a secondary system, a small auxiliary power source, was still active. Barely. It was putting out a trickle of energy, a microscopic wattage. I traced the power signature. It wasn't routed to the drive, or life support, or communications. All the energy was being channeled into one single system. The curved wall in front of the pilot's chair, the ship's main viewport. It was trying to show something. I followed the pilot's eyeless gaze upward. I reached out and laid the palm of my patched glove against the dark, curved wall, and the universe exploded into view. It was not a screen. It was a synapse. The moment my glove touched the wall, the darkness in my helmet didn't just vanish. It was torn away. My own senses, sight, sound, touch, were overwritten by a flood of alien perception. The link was total. The cramped dome, the dead pilot, my own aching body, all of it ceased to exist. I was no longer Everett Keats. I was the ship. My awareness was a sphere of perfect, 360-degree sensory input. I didn't see the starfield. I felt the gravimetric pull of every distant sun, a web of immense, gentle pressures on my hull. My body was not flesh, but a network of energy conduits. My thoughts the silent, instantaneous flow of command signals. and my attention was fixed on the objective ahead. The object Everett Keats had perceived as a colossal corpse hung in the void, but to these new senses, it was something else entirely. It was not dead, it was dormant. A singularity of biological energy, its internal processes slowed to a geological crawl, radiating a silent, immense promise. It was a wellspring, a feast. We called it the prize, and I was not alone. I felt the thrum of my sister ships around me, a chorus of shared intent resonating through the void. We were a fleet. We were harvesters. We descended. My perception focused. Probes, lances of pure energy extended from my fleet. They were not weapons. They were tools. They plunged into the dormant surface, designed to awaken and draw out the energy within. The response was not what we expected. A new sensation rippled across my awareness, originating from the points of contact. It was not a counterattack. It was a change in state, a system being activated, a vast, non-sentient logic unfurling itself. The prize was waking up, but not to fight. It was beginning a process. My senses screamed. The areas around our probes went silent. Not a silence of peace, but a dead zone, a null field where all energy, all resonance simply ceased to be. The null fields began to move, gliding across the surface with the inexorable slowness of a glacier. They were colossal gaps in reality, holes in my perception, and they were consuming the ships that could not get out of their path. I felt the resonance of a sister ship touch the edge of a null field. Its signal did not cry out, it did not explode, it just stopped. It was erased. Panic, a discordant shriek of corrupted data, tore through my systems. Retreat, flee. Weapons flared to life. Lances of energy that could crack moons were fired at the null fields. The beams hit the dead zones and vanished without effect. Shields of warped space-time, shimmering shells of pure force, flared around our hulls. They held for a moment. Then came the second wave. From the surface below, a new phenomenon rose to meet us. My senses registered it as a wave of pure chemical chaos, a tide that screamed on every frequency, its very nature a violation of physics. It washed over our shields. The shields didn't break, they dissolved. The elegant, complex mathematics holding them together came undone, the equations losing their meaning. The tide washed over my own hull. It was not a physical impact. It was an invasion of information. My systems flooded with error signals, hull integrity failing, power conduits destabilizing. The chaos was trying to rewrite my own physical structure from the outside in. I was one of the smaller vessels, faster, more agile. My main drive flared, a desperate burst of raw power, and I broke free from the tide, leaving my larger, slower sisters to be swamped and silenced. I was escaping. I was getting away. And then the third wave hit. It was not a tide. It was not a null field. It was a substance, thick, viscous, and cold. It registered on my senses as a biochemical polymer, an architecture of madness and recursion. It clung to my tail section. It did not burn or dissolve. It hardened. The ship shuddered. My flight path became sluggish. My systems screamed warnings, external mass increasing, drive efficiency dropping. The substance was spreading, encasing me. The clear, precise data stream from the starfield around me began to dim, to thicken, as if I were sinking into dark water. My final moments were a frantic, desperate reallocation of energy. I knew escape was impossible. The encasement was absolute. The hardening shell was leaching my power, my lifeblood, draining it into the colossal mass of the prize. But I could leave a message, a warning. With the last dregs of my auxiliary power, I channeled everything into a single, repeating broadcast signal from my hull. A simple, looping query aimed at any who might follow. Do not make our mistake. This is not a prize to be won. This is a grave. The last of my energy flowed into the message. My perception of the outside universe went from thick syrup to solid black. My systems died one by one. My final thought was a sustained single note of warning, held until the very end. And then, nothing. The link broke. I was back. I stumbled backward, away from the wall, collapsing onto the hard hexagonal floor of the teardrop chamber. I was Everett Keats again, inside a failing suit, my hand throbbing with pain. The chamber was silent. The last of its auxiliary power, the energy it had used to sustain its 50,000-year-old warning, was gone. I had just used it to read the final page of its log. They weren't prospectors. They weren't explorers. They were harvesters. They had come here to tap this creature, to bleed it of its energy, and in doing so, they had triggered its final automated defense system, the automated necrosis protocol. It wasn't a process of decay, it was a sterilization protocol. A planet-sized self-destruct sequence designed to cleanse itself of its own corpse and to take any opportunistic bacteria, like them, like us, with it. The null fields were the phagocytes, the city-sized cleaners. The tide of chemical chaos was the enzymatic fluid, and the hardening polymer that had encased this ship. It was the antibody agent forming the tombs that now filled the canyon. I wasn't a trespasser in a graveyard. I was a microbe in a body that was actively fighting off an infection, and the fever was rising. My mission, my ambition, Park's directives, they were all based on a single, fundamentally flawed premise that this thing was a dead, passive resource. We hadn't made a discovery. We had poked a god's corpse with a stick and mistaken its twitching for a sign of welcome. I scrambled to my feet. I had to get out. Not just out of this ship, but out of this entire system. My eyes darted around the chamber, seeking an escape route. The iris door I'd entered through was my only way, but it had sealed itself, its power source now as dead as the pilot in the chair. My eyes fell on my own tool, the chrono sampler. I had used it to open the lock. Maybe I could use it to power it. The theory was insane. The ship's systems were alien, incompatible, but the PCS had a small, self-contained power core. It wasn't designed to transfer energy, only to use it. Nash's voice echoed in my head. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken machine is to break it a little more, in the right place. I walked back to the entrance, the black ceramic wall where the iris had been. I pressed my resonance scanner against it, but the circuitry behind the lock was dead. The ship's final broadcast had drained the last drop of energy. There was nothing to communicate with. I had to force it. I flipped the PCS over, prying open the maintenance panel on its stock. The interior was a dense web of micro-conduits and power regulators. My eyes found the main power feed from the core. With the tip of my suit's multi-tool, I carefully bypassed the safety regulators, rerouting the full, unfiltered output of the core directly to the sonic resonator at the front of the device. I was turning a precision instrument into a crude, powerful cattle prod. It would almost certainly destroy the sampler. It might even overload and explode in my hands. But there was no other choice. I took a deep breath and pressed the muzzle of the PCS against the dead lock mechanism. Then, closing my eyes, I pulled the trigger. A deep, bone-jarring hum vibrated up from the device, through my gloves, and into the framework of my skeleton. The casing of the PCS grew hot against my chest plate, a warning of imminent, catastrophic failure. On the wall in front of me, the spot where the lock lay hidden began to glow an angry blue. A shudder ran through the alien metal. The iris tried to obey the raw, chaotic command I was feeding it. It didn't spiral open. It ground. A high-pitched metallic shriek tore through the silence of the chamber, the sound of alien machinery being tortured. The iris jerked open a few inches, then froze. The hum from the PCS died with a sharp crack. A wisp of acrid smoke, smelling of fried circuitry, curled from the device's seams. The chronosampler, my key, my weapon, my last link to my old life as a scientist, was now just a dead, useless slag. The opening was a rough, triangular gap, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I slammed my boot against the edge of the opening, The mangled iris shuddered but didn't budge. I did it again, a desperate, frantic kick. On the third impact, a section of the damaged mechanism shattered. The iris groaned and slid open another foot. I threw the dead PCS through the gap and scrambled after it, my armor scraping and screeching against the raw edges of the broken door. I tumbled out onto the hull of the needle ship, back into the swirling, corrosive mist. The canyon was a transformed place. The tide of solvent had risen dramatically, now only 20 feet below me. The mist was a thick, clinging fog, reducing visibility to almost nothing. My HUD was a frantic constellation of warnings. Suit integrity 79%, bio-seal compromised, left gauntlet, chest plate, helmet. I was a leaky vessel in a sea of entropy. My comms was still dead. I was too deep, shrouded by the crystal walls. I looked up. The wall I now had to climb wasn't the fossil I'd ascended before. It was sheer, unbroken crystal, its surface now slick and crumbly from the touch of the mist. There was no choice. I began to climb. It was a nightmare of failing physics. Every handhold was a betrayal. I would find a solid-looking ridge, put my weight on it, and feel it turn to powder under my glove. A chunk of the wall the size of my torso detached and fell away, plummeting into the solvent below without a splash. My suit was coming apart. I was leaving a trail of black polymer dust on the crumbling red crystal. I could feel the cold of the alien atmosphere on my neck where the helmet seal was failing. I climbed with a frantic animal haste, moving faster than the wall could disintegrate beneath me. With a final lunge, I hooked my arm over the canyon's edge. The lip crumbled, but I managed to find a more solid point and haul my torso up. I squirmed and kicked, pulling my body over the precipice and onto the leathery ground of the plains. I lay there, face down on the organic substrate, my body a single screaming ache. I was out of the tomb, out of the canyon. I rolled onto my back and stared up at the black, star-dusted sky. I keyed my comms. "Wolf, Nash, do you copy?" A burst of static answered, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. Then a voice strained and cutting through the noise. "Everett, my God, we thought we'd lost you. What is your status?" It was Wolf. I pushed myself into a sitting position. From here I could see it all. The crippled lander, a plume of frozen, solidified gas, venting from a rupture in its side. And hovering a few hundred meters away, the tiny, agile shape of the stingray. "My suit is failing," I said, the words coming out in short, breathless bursts. "But I'm on the surface. I know what this place is. I know what happened to the ship I was in." "Explain," Wolf commanded. "They weren't explorers," I said, my eyes sweeping the horizon. "They were harvesters. They came to tap this thing for energy. We didn't make a discovery. We rang a dinner bell. This whole body, it's a weapon. A planetary-scale sterilization system designed to erase anything that lands on it." "A cleansing protocol," Nash muttered, the terrible logic of it sinking in. A movement on the horizon caught my eye. It was far away, a subtle disturbance against the sharp curve of the planet-sized body. It wasn't a mountain range. It was a line of perfect, absolute blackness, a rolling wave of nothing that was gliding across the plains. It consumed the light. It consumed the landscape. It was a null field, a phagocyte, and it was moving in our direction. "Wolf," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, hollow tone. "The next phase has started. One of the cleaners is active, and it's coming this way." The comms crackled. "Keats, quantify!" Wolf's voice commanded, a blade of pure function cutting through the static. "I need a vector and a rate of advance." I extended my arm, using the targeting reticle on my HUD to frame the advancing phenomenon against a distant, fixed point on the horizon. The black line wasn't a wave, it was an erasure. A section of the star field, visible just above the curve of the corpse world, was being systematically blotted out from the ground up. It wasn't moving fast, it was just moving with a terrible, absolute certainty. "The leading edge is approximately 15 kilometers from our position," I said, my suit's computer feeding me the numbers. Velocity is steady, roughly 20 kilometers per hour. It's not a sprint, it's a grind, and it's wide. The front spans the entire visible horizon. "What's your status, Everett?" Wolf asked. "Your suit." I glanced at the cascading warnings. The integrity number was a blur, but the individual alerts were stark. Suit integrity, 76%. Oxygen mixture ratio degrading. Bio-seal failure. Multiple locations. "I'm a leaky container," I said, "and I'm running out of time." "Understood," Wolf replied. His decision was instant. The debate was over. Only the logistics of survival remained. "Our objective is the Stingray. Everett, your route is direct. Rendezvous at the lander. We are evacuating the vehicle now. We will meet you and proceed to the shuttle together. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged," I said. I looked from the crippled lander, a wounded animal on the plain, to the distant, tiny promise of the Stingray beyond it. The black line of the phagocyte advanced behind me. My path was a straight line through the heart of our failure. I began to run. It wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, punishing march against the weight of the suit and the drag of my own exhaustion. My world shrank to three things: the rhythmic clack of my mag boots on the leathery ground, the sound of my own breathing, and the white shape of the lander on the horizon, slowly growing larger. A new warning flashed on my HUD. This one more urgent. "Power fluctuation detected. Life support." My heart seized. The damage to the suit was causing secondary system failures. The quiet hum of the climate control faltered. A film of condensation began to form on the inside of my visor, blurring the edges of my vision. The lander was closer now. I could make out its shape clearly, the gaping wound in its side where Nash had bled its power away. And I could see figures. 3 of them, moving away from the vehicle's main ramp, silhouetted against the harsh starlight. 2 were moving with purpose. 1 was being dragged. My legs pumped harder. The film of ice on my visor grew thicker. I was looking at the world through a closing aperture. As I closed the final 100 meters, the scene resolved. Wolf and Nash, both in their own field suits, were half carrying, half dragging a third figure between them. Malcolm Park. He was struggling, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, his pristine suit now scuffed from being pulled across the organic ground. I finally stumbled to a halt before them, leaning on my knees for support. Wolf let go of Park, letting Nash handle him. He stepped forward, his faceplate just inches from mine. Through the double layer of visors I could see his eyes, hard, clear, and stripped of all illusion. "Report," he said, his voice a low growl in my ear. "My suit is failing," I gasped. "How much time?" Wolf didn't look back at the phagocyte. He looked at me, at the spreading frost on my visor, and his face was grim. "Not enough," he said. He turned to Nash. "Leave him." The order was absolute. Nash shoved Park forward, sending him stumbling to the ground at my feet. Park looked up at me, his face pale and contorted with terror and outrage. "You!" he spat. "This is your fault. You're emotional, irrational." Wolf ignored him. He looked at me, then at the Stingray, a distant point of light. "Can you make it, Doctor?" I looked down at Park, the man who had condemned us all with his perfect, suicidal logic. Then I looked at the shuttle, at the last chance for escape. And between me and that lifeboat was the architect of our doom. The choice wasn't a choice, it was a final, brutal calculation. Leaving him wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of resource management. He was dead weight, and we were out of time. I looked at Wolf. My own visor was a spreading web of frost, the world blurring at the edges. His was clear. He was waiting for my answer. "I can make it," I said. "Then we move," Wolf said. He turned, his back to Park, a final, complete dismissal. A sound, thin and reedy, came from the figure on the ground. Park was trying to get up, scrambling at the leathery substrate with his hands. "You can't!" he wheezed, his voice a signal of pure data corruption in my comms. "I am a corporate officer. This is a violation of Mandate 112, preservation of personnel." Nash took a step towards me and grabbed my arm, his gauntlet a solid, unyielding clamp. "Walk, Everett." He began to pull me forward, away from the sputtering analyst. "I will have you all decommissioned." Park shrieked, his voice rising in pitch. "Your service records will be flagged. Your assets seized. You will be non-entities. You are violating corporate law." He was firing procedural cannons at men who were already dead. His words were a bad data packet, irrelevant and corrupt. I let Nash pull me. I didn't look back. Each step was a move away from the man and the system that had put us here. He was a non-recoverable asset, a sunk cost. His own vocabulary had become his epitaph. We walked. Park's voice, a thin thread of useless procedure, crackled in our comms for another 30 seconds before cutting out for good. The silence he left behind was a mercy. The march was a silent, three-man funeral procession for a mission that had died at its inception. Nash's hand was a steel brace on my arm, his strength the only thing keeping my legs moving in a straight line. Wolf walked ahead, a fixed point of navigation, his posture rigid. He was a man operating on a single, clean directive. Survive. My own world was shrinking, collapsing inward from the edges. The frost on my visor had consumed the periphery. My vision was now a tunnel, a cloudy circle of fading light. We were 50 meters away when my left leg gave out. The knee joint in my suit, its power fluctuating, simply locked. I pitched forward and would have hit the ground if Nash hadn't held me up. "I'm not going to make it," I rasped, the words fogging my already obscured visor. "The hell you aren't," Nash grunted, his voice a growl of pure refusal. He shifted his grip, hooking his arm under my shoulders and half dragging, half carrying me the rest of the way. We reached the ramp. Wolf was already at the top, his hand on the external hatch control. He looked back at us, his faceplate, a blank mirror reflecting the dying world. We stumbled up the ramp, Nash's strength the only thing moving me forward. As my boots hit the metal of the shuttle's interior, I collapsed, my legs folding under me. Nash let me fall, turning to help Wolf with the hatch. Together they put their shoulders into it, grunting with effort as they forced the heavy door closed. The mechanism engaged with a deep, final thump, followed by the solid clack of the pressure seals locking into place. The external silence was replaced by the whine of the shuttle's tiny life support system kicking in. Nash moved past me, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. Wolf stood by the cockpit's small, armored viewport. I lay on the deck, my body a dead weight. "Get us off this rock," Wolf said. "Strap in," Nash replied. The shuttle's engines ignited with a high-pitched, violent scream of stressed machinery. The small craft shuddered, lifting from the ground with a lurch that threw me against the rear bulkhead. Through the viewport, I could see the phagocyte was upon us. It was not a line of black anymore. It was a cliff of non-existence, a moving wall of absolute erasure. It flowed over the plains, and where it passed, there was nothing. No leathery ground, no texture. Just a slick, featureless blackness, a fresh scar on the face of the corpse. We watched as it reached the crippled lander. The proud, white hull of the Scout did not explode or crumble. One moment it was there, a monument to our failure. The next it was gone, wiped from reality as cleanly as a line of incorrect data. Park, our footprints, everything we had been, everything we had done here, was erased. The shuttle banked hard, its nose pointing toward the stars. I reached up with a hand I could barely feel and fumbled with the seals on my helmet. They gave with a hiss of escaping foul air. I pulled the helmet off. The air in the shuttle tasted of machine oil. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. I let my head fall back against the bulkhead, my eyes closing. The journey up, away from that place, was a blur of G-forces and the steady scream of the engines. When I opened them again, Wolf was standing over me. He held out a water pack. I took it, my hand shaking, and drank. In the small viewport, the carrion star hung behind us. It was no longer a colossal wonder, no longer a keystone find. It was a disease, a tomb floating in the silent dark, waiting for its next victim. My career was over. My ambition was a ghost. All I had left was the story, the final report. I knew what I would write. It wouldn't be a tale of discovery. It would be a quarantine notice, a single desperate warning sent out to any who might follow. A plea to stay away from the beautiful, terrible promise of the dead god in the void. Some things in the universe are not assets to be harvested. They are truths to be survived. And survival is its own brutal legacy. The recorder light has been blinking for 3 days. It is a small red eye in the corner of a room that is otherwise entirely white. The walls are white. The sheets on the cot are white. The nutrient paste they slide through a slot in the door is white. My left arm from the elbow down is a numb, dead white thing, a permanent souvenir of atmospheric decompression. The doctors say the nerve damage is total. They call it a success. I am alive. This recording is my final debriefing, my testimony. I have told the story 3 times now, to 3 different sets of men in clean grey suits. They sit across a table from me, their faces impassive. They look like Park. They all look like Park. They have informed me of the official dispositions. Captain Roland Wolfe, court-martialed in absentia for dereliction of duty and the unsanctioned destruction of corporate assets. Nash, charged with capital sabotage. Their service records have been sealed. Their next of kin have been given the standard lost in a tragic mission anomaly notice. They have been written off the books, erased. I am the sole survivor, the expert witness. My testimony is considered valuable, but compromised. They listen patiently as I speak of the tombs, of the harvesters, of the necrosis protocol. They nod. They make notes on their slates. But they don't hear the warning. They only hear the opportunity. My debriefing is a biological assay, and they are filtering my testimony for exploitable compounds. I see it in their eyes when I describe the needle ship. They don't see a coffin, they see non-terrestrial technology. When I describe the antibody fluid that forms the tombs, they don't see a weapon. They see a novel polymer with unique sensor-blocking properties. When I speak of the terror, they see only my elevated heart rate on the biometric readouts. They have already reclassified my warning as a symptom of post-traumatic stress. My trauma is a contaminant in their data stream. Yesterday, one of them let it slip. They are authorizing a new mission to Sector Gamma 7. Not a small prospecting ship this time. A Keystone-class carrier with a full crew of engineers and a heavily armed corporate security detail. They call it a Type 2 Asset Realization Team. They are going back. They are going back to pry open the tombs. They thanked me for my service and told me my next posting would be a quiet research position on a core world. A reward for my trouble. I am no longer a prospector. I am damaged equipment being sent back to the warehouse for storage. I don't sleep. In the perfect white silence of this room, when I close my eyes, the link re-establishes. I am back in the chamber. I see the star field. I see the carrier approaching, a gleaming predator full of bright, ambitious men. I feel the dormant giant stir. I feel the protocols begin their slow, inexorable churn. My report will be filed. It will be logged under the incident code for the OGS venture. And I know, with the kind of certainty that doesn't rise from reason, but from ruin, that it will be cross-referenced with another file. Park, Malcolm. Posthumous vindication. The system he served has learned his lesson perfectly. I look at my dead hand, a permanent reminder of the price of survival. I know what they will find when they get there. They will find a well-marked graveyard. And they will find plenty of room for more graves.